Before you watch this video, I want you to know exactly what you're watching so that you don't waste your time. First and foremost, I'm not great at presenting things, so you might want to watch this video at 2x speed or maybe 1.5x, depending on how much detail you want. This is also sort of a spur of the moment video. I wasn't planning on recording this, but because I'm building some debt collection software right now, I needed to create this fake portfolio so that I could have sort of like a sample database to work with. Because I was creating that today, I thought it would be a good opportunity to show some of you prospective debt buyers what to expect when you're buying a debt portfolio, as well as some of the issues that you're going to run into with debt portfolios after you buy them, and how to fix some of those things that you're going to run into using Microsoft Excel. Because I wasn't planning on making this video, I'm low energy. It's like 100 degrees here right now. I didn't have a script, I didn't have a plan, and it is a very boring video. If this isn't something that you're specifically interested in, don't waste your time. If you're not interested in every little detail, if you just want to get a general basic overview, either watch it on 2x speed because this video is a little bit over an hour long, and I know it's slow paced and boring, but this video is meant for a very specific type of person, and that is people who are interested in creating a collection agency or buying debt, and who expect to buy debt or start a collection agency in the very near future and want to know the anatomy of a debt portfolio and some of the things that come along with managing and loading the files that they come in. So if that doesn't describe you, this isn't the type of video that you're going to want to waste your time sitting through. And I apologize for how dry it is, but I hope that some of the information provided in here can be very helpful to you. Hey guys, this is Bob, and I'm going to go over some answers to questions that you guys have thrown at me recently. I found a way to kill two birds with one stone. So one of the problems that I've had lately is that I haven't been able to show all of you the software that I'm working on because I'm using a production server, a production database that has actual people's information in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what a debt portfolio looks like as I create a dummy portfolio that I can then use not only for the development of my software, but also to be able to show the features without displaying private information for people. So I already started this process, and I'm just going to jump into it here. I have the sample portfolio here. And again, this is all completely fake, fabricated information. I used a website that generated it for me. So let's take a look at what we have here right now. The first column here is called order. Now, I always create this when I'm working with a portfolio. And for those of you who are wondering right now if you can do this with Google Sheets, you absolutely can, although I personally believe it's exponentially easier to use Microsoft Excel when you're modifying debt portfolios. So this first column here, let's just go ahead and delete that. Whenever I start working with a portfolio, the first thing that I always like to do personally is I create this column, order, and I make sure that I just document the order that all of the accounts are in. So that way, if I want to move things around, and I'll show some examples of what I'm talking about, but if I want to reorder the rows, I can always get them back into the same order once I'm done with that. So now we have a file number and an account number. These are both going to be different. The account number is going to be the account number from the original creditor. The file number is going to be your in-house ID number. It might be what you refer to as a case number within your debt collection software. And then, of course, we have first name and last name. Every once in a while, you'll get a portfolio that will be like this. It's been so long since I've used Excel, actually. I've been using Airtable for this type of stuff for quite a while. Yeah, so you'll see this every now and then. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this and then paste the values so that I don't have a formula here anymore. So if you do happen to get a portfolio like this, and you know what, let me actually zoom in so you can see this better. Hopefully that should help. So if you do get a portfolio where the names come like this, which is, it's uncommon, but it does happen every now and again, there's something that I like to do. First, I like to make some room in between the file that you're going to be, or I'm sorry, the column that you're going to be modifying and the rest of the columns. Because even though at a glance this looks like it's all just a first and a last name with a comma, you don't know that there might be, middle initials or a prefix or a suffix with the name or anything like that. So I always like to put a little bit of room in between here. Just make sure that if you do this, make sure you don't reorganize the columns. Don't sort anything while you have a space in between, in this case, the name and the social security number column. So let's go ahead and split this up. That would be, and I'm going from memory because it's actually been quite a while for me here, but text to columns, and then we'll split it just like this. We'll go to delimited, and we're going to use a comma as the delimiter. So what you can do now, if you want to check if there were any other commas in there, you can go into the next column over and then control and press down. And if it gets caught on something, when you press up and down here, then you know that there was another column that you need to, account for. Now you can do the same thing if there are spaces. So if you have a first name, a middle initial, or a middle name, or a prefix or a suffix, anything like that, you will want to do the exact same thing but with a space. In this case, there's two things you can do. You can do equals trim, and you can trim the space off of it this way. Or we can do the same thing that we would do in the event that there was let's say a middle initial there. So let's delete this. We'll go to data, text to columns, delimited, and we'll do this with a space. So now we can see by looking at the bottom here, and actually this is a strange configuration. Usually down in the bottom right corner, it will tell you how many columns you have. Oh, there we go. Okay. So if we highlight this, it says we have 100 rows here. And since there's nothing in here, it's completely blank. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And we only have one middle initial. You saw me put it in there. So there's really nothing else that we need to do at this point. So I'm just going to delete this extra space. I would leave that if that was a real middle initial. And then we would just change this to first name and last name. Now I use what's called Pascal casing. That's where there's no spaces, but you do a uppercase letter for the first word and second word. For each word, you're going to use a capital letter for the first letter of each word. And just because I'm sort of anal about this, I always like for the first name to be in front of the last name. But now we're going to have duplicates because I just created this as an example. So let's get rid of those anyways. Now, next, we're going to have an address. So you can see there's actually, I wouldn't really call this a problem because this is something that you're going to see, relatively often. So if this doesn't bother you, I'm going to show you a few ways that you can go about this. If this doesn't bother you, you can just go ahead and upload it just like this. But if it does bother you, there's two options. And it also depends on the size of the portfolio. This right here, this is 100 accounts. So I'm not going to be too concerned about if I have to go through by hand and manually edit a few things. So one of the things that you can do is you can just change this into a single address line by doing equals concat. That's for concatenate. We're going to say this, and we'll throw a blank space in there, and then this column. And then we can go ahead and copy this all the way down. or you can also drag it all the way down too. So if you don't want to do the entire thing at once, or if it gives you a problem, as it sometimes does, let's say that you have a space here and maybe some of these register as strings and some of them register as numbers. So it might give you a problem if you try to just click the corner or double click it. So you can also just drag it down like this if you need to. Of course, that gets really difficult when you're dealing with tens of thousands of accounts. And there's some other tips and tricks. So I'll actually show you one right now. Let's say that this is one of those problem portfolios where it's registering blank spaces. So, for example, I don't know exactly how to make this happen, but it's something that you're going to inevitably run into. Let's say you double click on this corner and it only fills in to right there because it doesn't recognize this as being an active cell. You can always do this. You highlight the entire column, you do Control F, you're going to go to Find and Replace, and I actually think, if I remember correctly, I think Control G also brings you there. No, okay, that's different. All right, so Control F, we'll go to Find and Replace, and we're going to leave this blank, and then we're going to replace this, and I've always used QQQ. So now we're going to fill in, it's because it's something that I know isn't going to exist anywhere else in the portfolio. So I'm going to replace all the blank spaces with QQQ, and then I'm going to, again, take QQQ and replace all of those with blank spaces. And then this shouldn't give you a problem. So now we have the entire address in one column here, but there's one thing that would also bother me. You can see here, and let me actually do this first. We're going to Control C to copy, and then we're going to paste values. So now we don't have the formula up here anymore. And now I'm going to Control F again. I'm going to go to Replace. I'm going to take 2 spaces and replace it with 1 space and hit Replace All. So you see how that changed street, and then the 420, it had 2 spaces there. Now it's just 1. It looks nicer. And I'll go ahead and click it again. Sometimes you might have to do that 2 or 3 times, depending on how big the portfolio is, how many things are incorrectly formatted. So this is if you just want to get it down into a single address line. But that's not the route that I want to take right now. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create some space here, and then we're going to do Control F. We're going to go to Find and Replace. And what I'm looking to do is I want to get the road, avenue, street, anything that's right after that, I want to split it off into a new column. So we have apartment 159 right here, for example. I want to send that over. So you need to get a little bit creative here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few of the common street types. So there's road, for example. And I'm going to replace road with road. And then this, I'm not sure if you can see it because it's really small, but this is just a vertical, it's what's called a pipe. So it's usually underneath your backspace key. If you hold shift and press that, it's the same button as the backslash, but if you press shift. So I like to put a pipe in there because that's also another character that doesn't normally exist on a debt portfolio. So we'll do that with road. And then let's do it with street. Avenue. And I'm sure there's more. What else is there? Okay, so we also have the abbreviations. So we have street. And then we have, now this is actually important. So we have road both with a period and without the period. So we're going to do the one with the period first. And the reason for that is if we do the one without the period, they're both going to be affected. So we'll hit replace all. And now we'll get rid of the period and do the same thing. And you can actually see here, I made a mistake because I should have done avenue and then av, but I didn't. So if you make a mistake like that and you want to fix it, it's a really easy fix. Let's actually change this back and then do it the right way. And I should have had this whole column highlighted. Since I didn't, normally I would want to do Control-Z to undo that and then redo it. But because this is a sample portfolio, it's 100 fake accounts, I'm not too concerned about it. So now we'll do this the right way. We'll take avenue, and then we'll put a pipe at the end of it. And now we'll do the same thing with, if we do the same thing with av now, it will break all of these avenue ones. And you can see we did the same thing. We have the same thing with road. Because of what I did with the period there, now we have double pipes. So again, this isn't like an exact science. I'm sure there are much better ways to do this than how I'm doing it right now. But this is just a, something you can do if you're anal about your portfolios. So I'm going to do this also. Another thing that we see a lot of is apartment. Now with apartment, you're going to want the pipe to be on the left. And we have this right here. It's av, but it's missing the e because the service that I used to generate the addresses, it had some quirks to it apparently. Okay, it's good enough. You get the point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to search a few things and replace them. So first I'll do double pipes. And I'm going to replace that with a single pipe, just like we did with the spaces before. And let's do that again. Okay. Now let's do a pipe and a space. And replace that with just a pipe. And we'll do the opposite. Now we'll do a space and a pipe and replace it with just a pipe. And then again, let's do double pipe and replace it with a single pipe. All right, so if everything worked out correctly here, we should just be able to do text to columns, which is under the data tab. And we're going to say delimited. And then we're going to delimit it with a pipe. So now you see that it split all of these up. So you might want to look it over, and there's going to be a few that slip through the cracks. So in this case, this street, we'll take this 736 and throw it in here. I'm not going to do that for everything. This is really just to give you a general idea. But if I would have looked through this a little bit more carefully, I would have noticed that this street, ST abbreviation, was probably one that was worth doing. So now we have another little dilemma here because some of these already had address line 2 in them. So how do we handle this? Let's cut that and we'll paste it. Let's actually do this. We'll paste it to the left of this. All right, cut and insert cut cells. Now we're going to take this, we're going to cut both of those together, and we're going to put it at the end of the portfolio. And now we highlight both of these, we right click, and you gotta bear with me here because it's been a while. No, we need to do select special. Find and select, go to special, and we're going to find all of the blanks. And then we're going to right click on one of the blank spaces and do delete. And we're going to say shift cells left, and that's why we put this at the far right end of the portfolio. So now let's highlight this column, and it doesn't look like there's anything in here. Let's just scroll down to double check. And since I'm recording, it's actually lagging just a little bit. And so this isn't something you're going to really come across ordinarily, but you can see I've got apartment 269 and apartment 472 here. Again, it's because it's a fake portfolio and I used an address generating service and it made some mistakes. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that. Great. Now we've got the apartment, which is the address line 2. We've got that separated. Now we have address and address 2, and we shouldn't have any apartments in here, although mine will because I was a little bit haphazard about it. So let's go ahead and get rid of this gap now before we screw anything up. Something else that you want to be mindful of is the zip code. It looks like I already formatted these correctly, but generally when you get a file, you're going to see the zip codes formatted like this. Now, this says California. This is not a California zip code. This, if I had to guess, would be like a New Jersey zip code or something in the Northeast. Let's take a look. I'm actually curious. But of course, it has a 0 in front of it because the zip code needs to be 5 digits. Might not even be anything in the U.S. What is this? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. All right, well, you get the point. Didn't really matter. That was more out of my own personal curiosity. I want to see if that would be a New Jersey zip code. But in the Northeast, we have these 5-digit zip codes, but they start with a 0. So you're always going to see that represented as a 4-digit number. So what we need to do is we need to highlight the zip code, and we're going to go to Format Cells. And then there's a few things you can do. You can go to Custom and then do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put 5 zeros in there, and that will do it for you. But what I actually prefer to do, if we go to Format Cells, there's actually a special column called Zip Code. So we'll set it as a zip code, and that will make sure that you have the 0 there. There's a few other ways that you can go about that, but again, I'm not going to get too deep into that. This really isn't a Microsoft Excel lesson. This is more along the lines of some of the stuff that you're going to normally see when you purchase a debt portfolio. So, of course, these creditors right here, these aren't even creditors. These are just made up words. So what I'm going to do is I have a file here, which is an export of lenders from one of my production systems. So let's take, I don't want them to be all the same or all in order, just because I'm going to be using this for testing purposes. So I want to have a little bit of a variety here. So I'm going to say Rand, I'm just going to generate some random numbers here. And then we're going to copy this, paste the values, we'll sort it, and now we'll grab 100 of these. So now we can actually put, you know what, let's do this too. Let's grab the type of debt. And we're going to go back to the sample portfolio. And now let's go ahead and replace this fake original creditor with a more realistic creditor name and a type of debt. And we'll do shift cells right in this case, even though those should be empty cells. But we need to move these down. And then we'll make sure it doesn't go past 100. So this is obviously just common sense, but a portfolio that has 100 accounts in it is always going to have 101 rows because the first row is the title. So this is original creditor and this is type of debt. And let's go ahead and put this over here. and we'll delete this weird looking original creditor. And I'd imagine I probably have a type of debt column here already. No, I guess not. All right, so that's perfect then. All right, so now we have the open date and the charge off date. And again, these are just made up dates in my case, but what you're going to generally see is that at the very least, they're usually going, the open date and the charge off date are usually going to be, like I said, at the least 3 months apart. Sometimes it's going to be more than that. And that's not always true. It's not true for all types of debt. So let's say a checking account, a DDA overdraft account. Generally, the charge off date is going to be the same date as the open date. Now that's something I've seen with U.S. Bank, for example. But something else that you'll see with other creditors, if you get some bank overdrafts, you might see an account that was opened in 1990 that was charged off in 2016. An account that was open for a ridiculously long period of time. And that's actually a really good indication. From my experience, those are people who, they're going to want to pay it. They've been a responsible person, I guess, for lack of better terms, for a long time. And then something weird, something unusual and out of the ordinary happened that caused their account to get shut down. So chances are that if they had that level of stability, if they had the same checking account for over 10 years, they're probably the type of person that's going to pay when you call them. So it's something worth noting. But different creditors will provide this information differently. So that's just something to be mindful of. It's something that you need to let your staff know about when they're collecting on the accounts, is that you don't want them to get into a script where they say, you opened an account with MasterCard. Let me actually take a step back here. If you buy credit card accounts, you're going to see the same thing that I just discussed with bank overdrafts. You're going to see cards that were open for several years, and then when they were charged off, now it's several years later. Whereas with a short-term loan, it's going to be maybe a 3-month difference, maybe, depending on the creditor, something more like 9 months. So I guess just you need to use a little bit of common sense with that. Does this open date and charge off date make sense together? Usually they will. I haven't come across many instances where they don't. Something else that you might see is a delinquency date. So it'd be like delinq date. That's how I usually see it, notated. And then it might sometimes be the same as the charge off date. It might be somewhere right in the middle. But for the most part, it's something that I've come to not expect. Now, if you're buying payday loans or short-term, personal loans, the delinquency date is often going to be the date that the first payment to the lender was rejected. So that's going to be the check date. So let's walk through the process here. When you take out a payday loan, let's say it's a walk-in lender like Advance America or Check and Go. You're going to walk into the storefront location and you're going to physically sign a check. And it's 2020. I actually don't know if this is still how it works, but this is how it's worked the entire time I was in the industry. So someone's going to take out a loan, they're going to be advanced $300 today, and they're going to post date a check written out to Advance America for $500 that's post dated 14 days in the future. So this delinquency date might actually show up as check date, and it might be exactly 14 days after the open date. So that's something to be mindful of. If it doesn't make any sense, if it's a 14-day payday loan, but the delinquency date or the check date is a year away from the open date, some sort of record keeping, wasn't done properly. So again, just food for thought, something to be mindful of. Now, phone numbers. Phone numbers are a disaster in the debt collection industry. I actually, when I created this fake portfolio for the purpose of, loading it for my software, I actually went through the trouble of, formatting these. But when you get a debt portfolio, very often you're going to see this. you're going to see just sort of no rhyme or reason for why they're formatted the way they are. And you can load it into your software like this, but depending on which platform you use, if something doesn't format properly, it's just going to be completely deleted. You're going to lose the phone number. So if you send your file through a skip tracing service like IDI or TLO, the phone numbers that you get from those services are going to come back nice and uniform. But what I always like to do is this. I'll highlight the column, I'll do Control F, we'll do find and replace, and again, I get rid of a few characters. So I'll get rid of the left parenthesis, the right parenthesis, space, and the dash. And then we're going to highlight this. We're going to do text to columns, which again is under the data column. And this time we're going to do fixed with. And you know what? That's not what I meant to do. This is what we're going to do. Equals right. And then a phone number should be 10 digits. So if we drag that down, you'll see how it trims the country code off of here. So anytime you do anything like that, now you see that we have a formula up here. So we're going to have to do copy, paste values. So you see how this actually turned them into strings. So right now we actually get a, this little green triangle in the corner. And if we click on this, we can do convert to number. Now, don't think about phone numbers as numbers. Phone numbers really aren't numbers in this context because you want them to format properly. You never need to add or subtract or divide a phone number. So you don't want it to be in the number format because then it gets handled in some strange ways. So it's the same thing with account numbers, file numbers, case numbers, whatever you want to call that. You want that to be in text format as much as you can because some strange things start to happen. Let me show you an example. There are these accounts which are Community Bank, so it's like retail credit, and the accounts always have this type of account number. Something along the lines of that. And then you see it turns into scientific notation. And if it was a little bit shorter, let's try this again a little bit differently. If it's like that, just a slightly shorter number, it doesn't turn to scientific notation, but you lose all of the leading zeros. So when you get the file, you're going to notice those green, those green triangles in the corner. And it's going to look like this. Now, again, this depends on your software. I can't speak for all debt collection platforms because they don't all handle data the same way, but you want to leave this in a string format. I don't want to get too deep into this, but there are some formulas that you can write along the lines of equals, equals right. And then we're going to click on this, and then we'll say the length of this minus 1. There we go. So now we have this formula right here. And what it's doing is it gets rid of this leading, for some reason I just can't think straight today. It gets rid of this leading apostrophe here, but it also treats it like a string as long as we copy and paste values. So now you see these two numbers, they're exactly the same, except this one has a leading apostrophe in front of it and this one doesn't. So again, these are just some things to be mindful of. Whereas if we take the same number, now if we try to just change this to text, it doesn't do us any good. Now that works, but that isn't always going to work because Microsoft Excel, especially, it has auto format features where it's going to try to normalize your data based on the other information in the column. So the reason it worked here is because I've got all sorts of strange things going on here, and I think it detected that there's no real pattern to follow. But ordinarily, that is not going to work. So this formula right here, this is an important formula that you're going to need to remember. So what I'm saying is that we're going to take this column right here, which has a leading apostrophe, and we're going to want all of the digits that are to the right of S2, and then this is the number of characters right here. So the number of characters is going to be the length of this minus 1, because that 1 is the apostrophe. Again, this is more like high level stuff, I guess, things that most people don't need to worry about, but you do need to be mindful of how is this going to look when you load it into your system. Are you going to load this into your system and have it converted into scientific notation, or remove all the leading zeros? Because that very well might be a problem. If you're reporting to the credit bureaus and you report an account number that doesn't actually exist, it's going to be a problem. So another thing that some people might like to do, and let's use this old phone number slot here as an example. Let's say that someone wants to try to fix it this way, because this is something that I've seen. Someone will say, well, it's I'm just going to add the zeros this way. So it's a 10-digit number. And I'm actually surprised that didn't work. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I've already formatted this entire column at some point. Anyways, with credit card numbers, for example, let's say you get a credit card portfolio. If they're all Visa or MasterCards, then you know it's going to be 16 digits. But you have one American Express in there, and then that's going to be 15 digits, and that's going to throw off the pattern. So I would always use this, this formula. You get what I'm trying to say. I'm not going to go on too much more about it. Maybe I can document it somewhere, so if you ever come across that, you'll know how to handle it. So let's just delete those because we don't need any of that stuff. Now, dates. This is another thing that's always going to be problematic. The way that dates are handled is, let me see if I can show you an example here. First and foremost, let me get rid of this 0 in August. And now it recognizes it as a date, so I'll change it to general. So a date is going to look like this. And I forget exactly what this is. I think this is the number of days since, I don't know, 19 something. I can't remember. It's so of little consequence that I've never really taken the time to remember what that is. But let's format this again. We're going to change this to a short date. But what you need to do is you need to be mindful that anytime you're formatting a large number of columns or copying and pasting things, moving things around, you got to make sure that your dates don't get formatted like that. And if they do, of course, the easiest thing that you can do is just to change it back to that format. Now, if for any reason, if you're an SQL type person, if you're going to be trying to manipulate your database manually, the SQL format is different from the, this normal format that we use for our software, at least here in the US. So that's going to be year, month, date. That is going to be, I think it's one of the presets. Yeah, right here. So this is like I guess you could say the computer format. This is how the databases see the dates. So if you ever get a portfolio and it has the dates like this, very simple, just change it to short date and it will format it for you. There are all sorts of other issues that you'll run into with dates, but that's sort of a niche situation. I'm not going to get too deep into that. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you ever see February 29th or February 30th on a year that doesn't have a February 29th or a 30th, it's always going to provide an error for you in the spreadsheet, and it's going to give you a problem when you try loading it into your collection software. If you ever see that date, that's a pretty clear indication that some agency or broker just very clearly made up a date and just dragged it around and filled some stuff in like that. So be very careful if you notice that a date doesn't actually exist, because it's more like a symptom of something much worse. Now, email addresses. You're not always going to get email addresses. If you're buying debt that comes from an internet lender, yes, of course it's going to have an email address. But if you're buying, let's say apartments, a tenant gets kicked out of their, gets evicted, and you're collecting on some past due rent, you might not have email addresses. In fact, it's likely that you're not going to have email addresses. So email addresses are good, but you might not always get them. Something else to be mindful of is that debt portfolios, generally speaking, have very bad email addresses. Not only because people provide bad email addresses, but also because record keeping is very bad with a lot of email addresses with these debt collection systems. Something that you'll unfortunately see quite often, and I hate when this happens. I don't know if this counts as a wild card, so this might give us a bigger problem, but you'll see email addresses that are missing the @ symbol. So again, it's a big problem, but don't ever rely on the email addresses. If you try to send out an email campaign to the email addresses on the file, you're going to get blacklisted as being a spammer because there's going to be bad email addresses on there. It doesn't even matter if it's a zero agency file. More often than not, the email addresses are going to have some sort of problem. Another thing that we see quite often is a data entry person will transpose the email address incorrectly from a paper application to the digital debt portfolio. So it's becoming less and less common as more stuff is actually happening digitally, but it's still something just to be mindful of, that's all. Now, the employer. Very rarely are you going to see all of the employers filled out on a file. I don't really understand how lenders lend money to people who aren't employed, because even the people who have Social Security, disability, or people who are on unemployment, it'll be listed here as unemployment or SSI, SSD. So Social Security. The interesting thing about this is you want to call these people on the 1st or the 3rd of the month. Different types of Social Security get paid on different dates, but right now it's 2020. I have to imagine that most people are getting direct deposit, if not getting a deposit onto a Visa or MasterCard that's provided to them by their state. So it might be good to have a way to mark these accounts so you can go back to them and collect on them when you know they're getting paid, or call them a few days before their deposit so you can ask them to plan for it. Again, we have a work phone number here. One more thing about the work phone numbers is when you see people that have unemployment or Social Security, there's going to be an 800 number, like a toll-free number that's actually for like the Department of Labor, or that's for Social Security Services, or whatever that department is called. So you're going to get a lot of duplicate phone numbers for the employers when people are listing the Social Security Administration as their own phone number. And that's actually very common. So now what we have here is we have references. There's reference 1, name and phone, reference 2, name and phone. And an application, let's say again for a payday loan, for example, a payday loan application will generally have 2 separate reference names that the person is supposed to give on the application. So it's not uncommon to see 2 of these. But when you send a file through IDI or TLO, you're going to be able to get up to, realistically speaking, as many relatives and associates as you want. So you can get first-degree relatives, second-degree relatives. I wouldn't even recommend calling second or third degree relatives, just the first degree relatives. And then associates, you never know what you're going to get with an associate. Sometimes an associate will be a roommate, sometimes it will be a family member, sometimes it will be a neighbor. But the associates I've always found to be pretty good references. Whereas the references that people list on their applications, usually they're very uncooperative. So if you have a file and it looks like this when you purchase it, don't ditch these phone numbers right away. But if you send it through TLO or IDI or Accurant, what I would do is I would push these to the back and maybe make them reference number 6 and 7 or 4 and 5, and prioritize the results that you get from your skip tracing service over the ones that come on the application, unless this is some fresh charged off 3 months ago type of paper where these numbers are going to still be good and in service, and the person is still going to be in contact with the debtor. That's, again, just from my experience. You may have a different experience. Bank names. Bank names is a big thing that you're going to deal with when you're buying portfolios. You don't necessarily always need a bank name, but you do need a routing number. You can go with a bank name and no routing number, or a routing number and no bank name, but you can't have no bank name and no routing number. Sometimes when you purchase a portfolio on the secondary market, that's going to be the case, unfortunately, but it's always something you want to try to avoid at any given point in time. Information is power when you're collecting debt, and if you call someone up, you want the ability to say that let's say it's a placement you're collecting for a creditor. You can say, More Money Services Incorporated deposited $345 into your Citizens Bank checking account ending in 5840 on, whatever the open date was from the account. So that's something that is really powerful when you're collecting on the debt. So if you don't have that information on there, it's going to make the debt much more difficult to collect, and it's going to give you a lot less credibility. Now, if you're missing the bank name, you can always search the routing number, and that's really not too much of a problem. Since these are all made up numbers, they're not actually going to match, so I'm not going to bother. But bank account numbers, this is a big place where you're going to see some horrible formatting. You're going to see a lot of corrupted bank account numbers. You're going to see a lot of scientific notation. You're going to see a lot of things that aren't numbers in there. For some reason, this column is something that a lot of people have trouble keeping good records for, because it's a long number, so it tends to get corrupted just based off of the default settings of Excel. And especially when you convert it into a CSV, it creates all sorts of other issues. And I'll show you that at the very end of this. Now, a routing number should always be 9 digits long. So just like we did with the zip code, we're going to go to Format Cells. And something that's really interesting, I don't know why it does this, but it always sets Portuguese as the original language for, I'm not sure why that is, but for a lot of times when you purchase a portfolio, you're going to notice that it's in Portuguese for the locale. So if any of you know why that is, comment down below and let me know, because I've never really figured out why that's the case. But let's go over to custom here. First, let's actually change it to general. So you see now, again, we have the same issue that we did with the zip codes. But if we go to format, we can go to custom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now, again, we have 9-digit routing numbers. Return reason, R01 is actually insufficient funds. R08, I believe, is stop payment. R02 is account closed. R16 is account frozen. And then I'm not sure about some of these other ones. I actually don't know that all of these actually exist, but these are return codes. So you can just Google search return codes if you need to know what these mean. Most good, for example, we'll say, again, I'm going to use this as all of my examples because it's very readily available, but payday loan paper should always have this return reason space on there. If it doesn't have it, not the end of the world, but it's always helpful to know. Because this person right here in R01 return code, they had insufficient funds. It happens. They got a short paycheck, they mismanaged, they misbudgeted. It happens. R02, this is a little bit more nefarious because that means that they closed the account out before the lender could withdraw the funds in accordance with the contract. So R08, in my opinion, I think is pretty much the most nefarious because it's actually putting a stop payment on the transaction. So this person gets a deposit for $345. They're supposed to pay back maybe $500 in 2 weeks, but they call the bank and they say, don't let Lending Services Incorporated pull any money out of my account. They're going to try taking $500 on November 3rd, block that transaction. So you have a little bit of leverage, I guess, when you talk to them, or at least you know who you're dealing with based on what that return reason is. Just make sure that you don't accuse people of things because some funny things do happen with bank accounts. And plus, you're not really going to create a good rapport with people if you start accusing them of things. That's a whole different story for a whole different day. We talk about collection tactics some other time, but the return reason, it's not always included. It's not included on all types of debt. It doesn't apply to all types of debt, but with certain anything that comes out of a checking account really should have some sort of indication of why it was declined. Now, for the balances, we have 4 balances that are actually relevant. We have the original balance, the principal balance, the charged off principal, and then the current balance. So the current balance will always be higher than the original balance. In this case, because I did some random things to get these numbers, that's not really the case. But the current balance is going to be the original balance plus any interest or charge-off fees or penalties or whatever the original creditor may have added to it before the account was sold. So the original balance should be the actual amount that the person had, in this case, deposited into their account. Or if it was a credit card, it would be the amount that was actually, that the credit card was maxed out at before it went into collections. The principal balance quite often is the same balance as the original balance. That might not always be the case, but it's what I more often than not have seen over the years. Whereas the charged off principal and the current balance are quite often the same numbers as well. Now, what these numbers mean to your agency might be different than what it means to a different agency. So the way that I had always handled this over the years, I'd come to find out a few years ago, was completely different than the terminology that a good buddy of mine was using for his agency. They were actually using the charged off principal as sort of the original balance, and the current balance, was used for the same thing. But then I like it so that you can take this original number, subtract the paid to date, and then get the current balance, assuming that there's been no interest or charge off fees added to it. So there should also be a column on here, which we don't have, which would be called accrued interest. So let's fill a few of these in. All right, so we can actually, let's do this. Let's actually do the math here. So we're going to say the original balance and principal balance. Let's keep these the same because that's how I've always, like I said, more than often, that's how I've always seen it. So then we're going to take the original balance and we're going to add the accrued interest to it. And now the current balance is going to be the charged off principal minus the paid to date. And you see that those numbers keep changing. That's because I still, anytime I do something, let me just show you an example. There we go. I still have it set to random on one of these right here, random between 20 and 60. So anytime that I make a modification on something, they're all going to change. So in order to prevent that from happening, I'm going to Control C to copy and then paste values. Now, Don't get me wrong, what I'm doing here is strictly for informational purposes. Don't ever take a debt portfolio and start throwing random, interests or fees onto it. That's a great way to get into a lot of trouble really quick. And some agencies do that type of thing. So, um, I don't know what to say other than it's not worth it. And I think that it's not only immoral, but it's illegal. There are very specific guidelines as to what you can and can't add. And because they change between different types of debt, different ages of debt, different states, it's something that's just better off not playing with. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of things that I didn't take into account on this portfolio because I just sort of built it on the fly. But a few more things that might be worth pointing out is that some of the accounts, let's see, we'll go to the charge off date. Some of the accounts might be missing some information, some open dates or charge off dates. And it's unfortunate, but this stuff does happen. A lot of time there's data entry issues or whatever the case is. So I always like to do this, and this is also why I put this sort column at the beginning. Is so that I can actually organize it like this. I can do sort and filter, sort A to Z. And again, never do this if you have a break between your columns. Only do this if all the columns are together so that they stay together. We're going to say expand the selection, and what that means is sort all of the columns using this as the key column. And now if we go down to the bottom, we can actually see where it's missing. So in this case, we're not going to have an exact date, but depending, again, you need to use your discretion on this. Depending on which debt collection platform you use, you may not be able to load the file if it's missing key information like this. So maybe in this instance, we're going to just take these delinquency dates and we're going to fill them to the right. And then we'll sort this column, which is the delinquency dates. And same thing, let's fill this to the left. And then the open date. We'll take a look at these, see if these numbers are the same. They are. So there's not much we can do there except to fill it in with that. And this is something that your collectors need to be mindful of. They need to be paying attention to, does the open date and the charge-off date make sense? Now, there's something else I need to show you with the Social Security numbers. And I guess we just glossed over this. Let me just throw these into general. So right here, Social Security numbers. I always like to sort the Social Security numbers. Just get rid of a few of them here. Is something that we see quite often. All right, that's good enough. We'll see blank or missing Social Security numbers. And that, unfortunately, again, is just bad record keeping. What I think that causes that is when somebody takes a number field and tries to put it into where a string belongs, or when someone takes a string and tries to push it into where a number belongs. So we'll sort this, and right away we see that these are incorrect. They're not going to work, and we also have two of these at the bottom. So how you want to handle this, again, is going to depend on your software. You need to get to know your software. You might be able to load it just like this. You may have to actually fill this in with something in order for it to work. But just like the zip code, just like the bank routing number, we have an option here under format. We'll go to special and then Social Security number. And it's going to format it like a Social Security number. I personally have like a little bit of PTSD from seeing this format here, the all zeros, because there's a lot of bad portfolios floating around, stuff that shouldn't be on the market that has Social Security numbers that look like this, more often than not. If you ever see a file, and it looks something like this, just a couple Social Security numbers, that's a big red flag. I can't think of any debt that doesn't come with social security numbers except some, like pre-charge off or some zero agency medical debt from, let's say, maybe a chiropractor or a dentist, someplace that doesn't take your social security number for billing purposes. So I always like to sort the social security number column and actually make sure that I have all of the social security numbers, because it's arguably some of the most important information in the file. Because even if you have no phone numbers, even if you have no address, which having no address is actually a really big problem. If you ever get a file like that, try to get your money back right away. But what I'm trying to say is that you can always use a skip tracing platform to get the important information, even if you don't have it on the original file, but you need that social security number. So we're going to format this. We'll get it back to social security number. And then again, one more thing that I want to do here. Let's sort these. So now I can, if I want to make these look a little bit more uniform, maybe I want to do this. See, these, for example, they say AP, and I actually want it to be APT. There, so now we've got looking uniform. So that's some of the benefits of being able to sort the columns like that. Also, if you ever notice that a city and a state is missing, it's not a huge deal. If there's just a few of them, you can always take the zip code and just search for it and manually fill those in. Information does get corrupted. A lot of these debt brokers and agencies and lenders, they're just, the sad fact of it is that they're not incredibly, good with managing this information or with handling spreadsheets. So this, what you're looking at here right now, this is very representative of what most debt portfolios look like that you're going to buy on the secondary market. They're going to look very, very similar to this. And, you might have more information or less information. They might even have some payment history on there. They might have some VIN numbers for vehicles. You might have a whole bunch of relatives. You might have a dozen phone numbers per person. But for the most part, this is the key information that's on there. I'm sure there are some things that are slipping my mind right now, but this is sort of the essentials, as I would call it. So if you have any questions about this stuff, feel free to let me know, and I hope that some of these techniques that I've showed you are helpful to you. One more thing I'm just going to go over real quick is how to actually find out what this portfolio is worth, how to get the specs from it. So we're going to go to the current balance, and let's get the sum of this. So do sum. So at face value, this is $56,795. Let's say that this is a zero agency file, and as such, you're paying 6 cents for it. So this file might cost $3,407.70 at 6 cents. And then the average balance, of course, is the face value divided by the number of accounts. So this is some of the information that you're going to get when you're looking at debt portfolios. You're going to get the face value, the price, the average balance, the number of accounts, and of course, you're not always going to get the number of accounts or the average balance, but you should get one or the other, and then you can figure out the missing variable once you have the other one. So this is a fairly representative idea of what you might see on a listing for a debt portfolio. But some other important factors that you can't see in the portfolio is how many agencies it's been through. And there's another word for this that I can't think of. So now there's a few different things that this could be. It could be zero agency, which is also first placement. And let's come back to this terminology in a second. And there's one agency, which is second placement, two agency, third placement, and you get the point. Now, there are some brokers that will refer to zero agency paper. Um, they'll refer to their debt as zero agency paper when it's not really zero agency paper. This is where I'm sure if any of you are familiar with me, you know that I don't always have the highest opinion on some of these debt brokers, because if a debt broker is selling some one agency paper and calling it zero agency, what they're doing is they're calling their zero agency paper ultimate zeros, or whatever weird terminology they have. And then the logic that they'll use is that we collect on it in-house with a very, very soft approach. So we have like a customer service approach. We don't even consider it a collection attempt. Be very careful about that. Make sure that you understand where the paper is coming from, how it's being worked, so that you know if the people you're buying it from are working it in-house. You'll know if they skimmed the easy money off the top, because if this is a true zero agency file, yeah, it might be worth 6 cents. But if this is not one of what they consider to be their ultimate zeros, or whatever it is, they may have skimmed the easy money off the top. This might now be a 3-cent file. Some of the easiest people to collect on are going to be the people who answer the first time they're called and say, you know what, I didn't know who had this. I knew I missed a payment. I didn't know what happened to it. Nobody called me. And they're going to be the quick, easy money. So you're not going to want to buy zero agency paper if it's not a true zero agency file. So something else that's important is the shelf life. How long has it been shelved? Well, you know what? Let me actually take a step back here for a minute, so you get an idea of what this looks like. Also, just be mindful that people come up with these weird, these weird workaround terminology. So make sure that you get some sort of like explicit information about that. Get as much information you can about how was it worked, where was it worked at all, was there even like a customer service pass on it. Now, how long the debt has been shelved is a whole different story, because some out of stat debt, some stuff that's 10 years old, that's never been collected on. So there might be some zero agency 10-year-old debt, which I actually came across 2 years ago, maybe even last year, I don't remember. But I had these bank overdrafts, and they were out of stat, like pretty severely out of stat by a few years, and they were being sold as zeros, but they were relatively cheap. They were being sold for the type of rates that you would generally see, like two agency paper being sold for. So I bought some. It was going to be some filler paper, some dialer stuff, and it turned out that these accounts, because nobody had ever called them and they had slipped through the cracks in this very unusual situation, these accounts liquidated so ridiculously well that the people who were selling the accounts to me stopped selling them. They realized immediately that they were sitting on a gold mine, and they refused to sell any more accounts. So that's kind of unfortunate, because we were doing so well. And even the people who knew it was out of stat, they would pay it just because they knew that they owed it. Like, these were some of the best customers ever, or the consumers. We had Bank of America accounts, and people just wanted a letter saying that it was paid. They were more than happy to pay it. The people who were upset about how old it was would gladly take a 50% settlement. And so the date isn't everything. Just as if you buy some one agency paper, but it was charged off 2 months ago, that debt has not been shelved long enough to work again. So the date is important to some extent, but only when taken into account how long it's been shelved versus how many agencies it's been through. And then also keep in mind that people are rarely honest about how long something's been shelved for. People are usually going to stretch it just a little bit longer. Um, and then there are some oddball situations where you have NSFs or people who are on payment plans, where even if the file has been shelved for 6 months, some of those people may have been called as early as last month to try to collect on a declined payment. So there's all sorts of edge cases, and the best thing I can really advise is to just sort of jump in and get a little bit of experience. If you're planning on opening an agency, know that you are going to lose a little bit of money while you try to, acclimate to the industry and get used to this stuff. And for a lot of files, unfortunately, and this is something that I would like to have a hand in trying to fix to some extent, but media, the actual like copies of the contracts, it's generally not included with portfolios. I would say it's the exception more than the rule. So you can't get too reliant on it. And I think that a big problem with media is that it always seems to come in PDF files, which are very, they're very big. People don't know how to transfer them. People don't name them properly. People don't load them into their system the way they do with their debt. And a lot of debt that at one point had media generally isn't going to have media on the secondary market. And even when you get media, it might not be named. It might not have the account numbers on the file names. So you're not actually going to be able to find what you're looking for. So keep in mind when you're buying a file, more often than not, or at least depending on what type of debt you buy, this might be all that your money is actually going to get you. A spreadsheet that looks just like this. So be prepared for that. Decide if that's really something that you're okay with, if that's something that that you can live with, if that's a loss that you can afford to take if the file turns out to be bad. And don't invest more than you can afford to lose if things go off the rails. Small businesses fail all the time, and I know a lot of people see this industry as having like a low bar to entry. But if you're going to play by the rules and make sure that you don't get in trouble, legally speaking, you need to hold yourself to a higher standard, because that low bar that I was just referring to, the people who get in because of a low bar to the industry are also the people that are more inclined to run into these legal troubles at some point. For working accounts in a portfolio that were fabricated by a broker that wanted to puff up the balances a little bit to get some extra money out of you. You just need to do your due diligence. You need to get familiar with the creditors, familiar with the portfolios, familiar with how they collect, and then also keep in mind that debtors aren't always completely honest. So as soon as you have the first debtor tell you that it's fraud, don't immediately assume that the broker ripped you off. It's something that it really, you have to dig deep into the context. Is the entire file problematic? Is every third person that you talk to saying that they never had a loan or they never had a bank account at the bank that's listed on the file? That's one thing. But consumers aren't always going to be completely honest. So use common sense, do your due diligence, and you'll be fine. But there is definitely a learning curve to this stuff. If there's anything else that you guys want me to go over in one of my long, unorganized, videos like this, feel free to let me know below. And if you made it this far, I'm really interested to hear what video topics you would like to hear me talk about next. And now that we have this, I should be getting some sample videos of the debt collection automation software that I'm building that'll have some of these fake, placeholder accounts in it. So I can now show you. And that is all. I hope you guys are all safe and enjoy the rest of your day.